red and blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Hi souls! In this video, we are going to talk about microbiology. Microbiology, which studies the microorganisms, which are extremely small, microscopic microorganisms. They are diverse, clustered. It's either unicellular or multicellular organisms. And because these microorganisms are very tiny, very small, that is why magnifying instruments like microscope were invented. And because these microorganisms are very small, wherein we cannot see their activities by our naked eye, that is why magnifying instruments were invented. A good example of this magnifying instrument is the microscope, which the scientist uses to view the activities of these microorganisms. Let's proceed to the three types of microscope, which is the basic one because it has about 1000 to 2000 times of magnification power. It is basic because we can view the organisms, this specimen, through the series of its lenses, and it uses light waves. And the other microscope is the transmission electron microscope. It gives much better details than the compound because it has about 100,000 to 200,000 times of magnification power. But the bad thing about this microscope is that we cannot view the organisms, we cannot use the live microorganisms for the observation. And the last microscope is the scanning microscope, which is much cooler than the two because we can view the image in 3D. Few methods of preparation under the compound light microscope are by suspending the microorganisms in water, which is also called as the wet mount, and the second is by using the gram staining technique. If it turns pink or red, it is negative, and it turns purple, it is positive. Before the discovery of microbe, it was believed that life arises from non-living matters. It was called the spontaneous generation theory, which Louis Pasteur disapproved this theory using his famous one-neck flask experiment. Through Pasteur's one-neck flask experiment, which he exposes the broth to the air vessels that contain the filter to prevent the particles from passing through to the broth of medium. He also had this another vessel with no filter at all, with air being admitted by a curve-shaped tube that prevented dust to enter. But by boiling the broth, he ensured that no microorganisms survive within the broth at the beginning of his experiments, thus nothing grows. This literally means that living organisms that grow in such broth come from outside as spore on dust rather than spontaneously generated within the broth. He ended the spontaneous generation theory through his famous one-neck flask, and then he therefore concluded that life comes from life. And then there was this interesting man from Germany named Robert Koch who proposed the germ theory of disease. He proved that a bacterium caused anthrax and provided experimental steps about this theory. Robert Koch established this experiment that microbes can cause disease. Now, the blood of sick cattle who were infected by anthrax had large number of Bacillus anthracis. He then take a sample of blood from the sick animal, observe it under microscope, and after some time, he injected to the same healthy animal, and then he found out that the sick animal and the healthy animal has the same disease. and it was a major breakthrough for Mr. Robert Koch. Now let's talk about the important people in microbiology. Let's start with Louis Pasteur, which is a French chemist famous for fermentation, vaccination, and the for this spontaneous generation theory. He also develops this pasteurization, and some of his achievements are Copley Medal, Lumford Medal, Mountain Prize, Leeuwenhoek Medal, and Albert Medal. And the other important person in microbiology is Ferdinand Kohn, classified bacteria according to its structure. Most bacteria come from three basic shapes, which are the coccus, rat, bacillus, and spiral. And the other one is Robert Koch, who discovered the anthrax disease cycle and the bacteria responsible for tuberculosis and cholera. He received the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine in 1905 for his research in tuberculosis. And now let's proceed to the types of microorganisms. There are mainly 6 types of microorganisms. One is bacteria, fungi, protozoa, algae, viruses, and microscopic parasites. Now let's begin with the bacteria. Bacteria are considered as non-living things because they lack of nucleus. They are unicellular organisms and they're produced by means of binary fission. This is a binary fission, which is a sexual reproduction, the separation of the body into forming a new bodies. In the process of binary fission, an organism duplicates its genetic material, which is the DNA, and then divide it into two parts through the cytokinesis, with each new organisms receiving one type of the DNA. Bacteria are characterized through its structure. The first one is the spherical shape, which is the shape like ball called cocci, and then rod shape known as bacilli. They are the curvy ones, and the third one is the spiral. They are known as the spirilla, which are coiled and usually bring Lyme disease and syphilis. And the second type of microorganisms are the fungi, such as mushroom, which is the good example, molds, yeast, and they are eukaryotic cells with true nucleus. Mostly are multicellular, and we can find it everywhere. They obtain nutrients by means of absorbing organic material from their environment. They provide food and provide antibiotics for fermentation of alcohol, and they reproduce by releasing of spores, and some mushrooms are poisonous and mistakenly eaten by humans because they look edible. The other types of microorganisms are the protozoas. They are single-celled eukaryotic organisms. They come from in many different shapes and sizes, either free-living or parasitic, which feed in organic matter such as other microorganisms or organic tissues and debris. Some are parasitic, which means they live in other plants and animals, including humans, where then cause diseases. And the next types of microorganisms are the viruses. They are small parasites that cannot reproduce by itself. Viruses are acellular microorganisms, which means they are not composed of cells. Essentially, a virus consists of proteins and genetic material, either DNA or RNA, but never both, that inert outside of a host organisms. However, by incorporating themselves into a host cell, viruses are able to co-opt the host cellular mechanisms to multiply and infect other hosts. Viruses should not even be considered microorganisms in the strict sense because they are not free living. They cannot reproduce and carry on metabolic processes without a host cell. Now, viruses can infect all types of cells, from human to the cells of other microorganisms. In humans, viruses are responsible for numerous diseases from the common cold to a deadly Ebola. Here we have the illustration. For letter A, members of the coronavirus family can cause respiratory infections like common cold, severe acute respiratory syndrome, also known as the SARS, and Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, also known as MERS. And B, for Ebola virus, a member of filovirus family, as visualized using a transmission electron microscope. Now, the other type of microorganisms are the algae, singular for alga. They are plant-like protists, can be either unicellular or multicellular microorganisms. Their cells are surrounded by cell made up of cellulose, a type of carbohydrates. Photosynthetic organisms, they can extract energy from the sun and releases oxygen and carbohydrates in the environment. They are important in ecosystems. Some products contain ingredients from algae, some food like an ice cream, salad dressing, or beverage products, lipstick, or even a toothpaste. Agar, for example, is a gel-like derived from algae, which can be mixed with various nutrients and caused to grow microorganisms. And also a good example of algae are the seaweeds. Some algae are poisonous because they secrete toxins. Example is a fish eat a seaweed and then this seaweed excrete toxins or releases toxins inside the body of the fish, and then therefore this fish is dangerous for us humans. Now let's talk about the last microorganisms, which are the microscopic parasites, include roundworms, flatworms, and the helminths. They target your gastrointestinal tract. And what is caused by microscopic parasites? For example, is the Giardiasis is an infection in your small intestine. It's caused by a microscopic parasite called Giardia lamblia. Giardiasis spreads through contact of infected person, and you may also get this one by drinking contaminated water or eating contaminated food. And now let's proceed to the classification of microorganisms. Let's start to highest to lowest. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And you can also memorize the mnemonic, which is the Dina's kids prepare candy over green fried spinach. Under the first largest group is the domain. Under of these are eukaryotes and prokaryotes, and the second largest group are the kingdom. Under of these are bacteria and archaea respectively. Eukaryotes, under of these are protists, fungi, plants, and including us humans. And that's it for this video. I hope you like this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.